At the reading, my daughter-in-law said, "You're out of the will, Kathleen." Then the lawyer started laughing. The words landed like a glass shattering on marble, quiet but impossible to ignore. I sat at the far end of the mahogany table, hands folded in my lap, trying to keep my breathing even. The conference room smelled faintly of leather and printer ink, the kind of sterile air only law firms seem to have. Across from me, Sarah crossed her legs neatly and smiled like she'd just closed another deal. She looked every bit the part of a corporate attorney, tailored navy suit, diamond studs posture, too perfect to be natural. My son Evan sat beside her, eyes down on his phone thumb, scrolling through nothing. He hadn't said a word since we arrived. Harlan Pierce, the family's attorney for almost 3 decades, cleared his throat and began to read. His voice was slow and deliberate, the same voice that had once walked Richard and me through our first mortgage papers 40 years ago. Clause 24, he said, adjusting his glasses. To my wife, Kathleen Mercer, no further distribution shall be made. The room stops breathing. My thumbnail dents the lacquered mahogany. 88 million reduces to 7 words stamped flat and legal, like a phrase in a foreign language. Sarah's smile widened. That means she's not included in the remaining estate, she said, as if explaining basic math. I didn't reply. I just stared at the grain of the table, tracing the lines with my eyes until they blurred. $88 million, a lifetime of building, saving, investing, strategizing, gone with a single clause. Harlan looked up from the papers. His brow creased, and for a long moment he didn't move. Then he leaned closer to the document, sliding his glasses down his nose. Something flickered behind his eyes, curiosity, maybe disbelief. He turned the page back then forward again, lips tightening. Cold air needles my forearms. A vent ticks somewhere in the ceiling while Harlan flips back a page he doesn't trust. Sarah tilted her head. "Is there a problem, Harlan?" He didn't answer. Instead, he reached for another folder from his briefcase, a thicker one sealed with a red ribbon. He laid it flat on the table and exhaled sharply. Before opening it, his gaze drifted toward me. "Mrs. Mercer," he said, his voice lower now, "how have you been holding up?" It was such an odd question in that moment that I almost laughed. As well as one can, I replied. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. He nodded once almost to himself, then opened the second folder. The rustle of paper broke the silence. His eyes scanned the first few lines and then he laughed. Not a nervous chuckle, not a polite cough. A genuine, disbelieving laugh that startled everyone in the room. Sarah's expression snapped. "What's so funny?" Harlan placed his glasses on the table, still smiling. "Just give me a second," he said. "This is remarkable. Ledger paper ghosts my fingers. 35 years of catching what people hide taught me one habit: follow the ink, not the voice. My name is Kathleen Mercer, 68 years old, retired financial auditor. For 35 years, I balanced books, verified accounts, and made a living out of finding what people tried to hide. I met Richard, my husband, back when numbers were still written by hand, in ledgers, not screens. He was the visionary. I was the one who made sure the vision had structure. Together we built Mercer Technologies from a 2-room startup into an empire that funded scholarships, research labs, and ironically law firms like this one. When Richard got sick last year, I stepped back from everything to care for him. Sarah, my daughter-in-law, stepped forward. She was efficient, polished, and unnervingly calm. She said she was helping manage transitions. I thought she meant business contracts. I didn't realize she meant me. Back in the room, Harlan flipped to the last page and tapped his pen twice against the margin. "Sarah," he said quietly, "when exactly was this version of the will finalized?" 6 months ago, she answered quickly. "Richard asked me to coordinate the update with your office. You signed the witness statement yourself." Harlan frowned. "Did I?" He reached into another folder, pulled out an earlier file, and compared the signatures side by side. "I don't recall this format." Sarah's tone sharpened. Everything was done according to procedure. Perhaps he said still calm, but the procedure doesn't usually skip my review. Evan finally looked up. "Dad wanted things simplified," he muttered, avoiding my eyes. He didn't want Mom to have to deal with it. I turned toward him. Did he tell you that? He hesitated, then shrugged. Sarah handled the paperwork. I just signed where she told me. Harlan's pen froze mid-air. He glanced at me again, then back at Sarah. Interesting, he said, because according to this index, the amendment wasn't filed under my authorization. It was filed under your firm's name, Sarah. Different jurisdiction, different timestamp. Sarah's smile faltered. That's irrelevant. Not to me, Harlan said, or to the court if anyone asks. The air changed then subtle but sharp, like the moment before a storm. Sarah leaned back in her chair, jaw tight. Evan fidgeted with his tie. I stayed silent. Years of auditing had taught me the value of silence. It makes guilty people talk faster. Harlan closed the folder with deliberate care. Before we proceed, he said I'd like to note something for the record. He reached into his briefcase again, pulling out an envelope sealed in silver wax. My breath caught. That seal, I recognized it. Richard used to keep the stamp in his study drawer. Harlan broke it open and slid out a single handwritten page. He didn't read it aloud at first. He just stared at the handwriting, then placed it beside the printed will. The contrast was striking the mechanical font against the shaky human strokes of ink. Then finally, he spoke. Richard Mercer left a supplemental note. It wasn't part of the will on file because it arrived at my office by courier 2 days before his passing. Sarah straightened in her seat. That's impossible. He was hospitalized, yes. Harlan interrupted softly. He was, which is precisely why this note is so fascinating. He turned the page so everyone could see. At the bottom, in Richard's familiar hand, it read, "If there are discrepancies between my spoken instructions and my true intent, trust the numbers Kathleen knows." Silence. Only the ticking of the wall clock filled the space. Harlan smiled again, small knowing. "Well," he said, leaning back, "it seems your husband was far cleverer than any of us realized." Sarah's face went pale. Evan looked between us, lost. I felt the tremor in my fingertips subside, replaced by something steadier focus. For the first time since Richard's funeral, I felt the faintest hum of control return. Whatever Sarah thought she'd orchestrated, it wasn't over, not by a long stretch. And as Harlan gathered the documents, setting them neatly on the polished wood, I caught the glint of metal beside his hand, the silver pen Richard had always used. The same one Sarah once said had gone missing. That small reflection told me everything I needed to know. The numbers never lie. People do. The night before Richard went into the hospital, the house was quiet in a way that didn't feel right. The kind of quiet that hums under the surface, thick and unspoken. I remember the smell of rosemary chicken, the sound of a clock ticking behind the curtain, and the way his breathing carried a soft wheeze every few minutes. It was a Friday night in late February. Cold rain tapped against the kitchen windows, small and rhythmic like someone gently knocking to be let in. I had set the table for 3 Richard, myself, and Sarah. Evan was supposed to join us, but he'd been called to the hospital. That's what he always said lately. Richard sat at the head of the table, a wool scarf still draped around his neck, his fingers thinner than I'd ever seen them. He had lost almost 15 pounds in 2 months, but his eyes still had that sharpness, that analytical gleam that made investors trust him for decades. "Smells good," he said, coughing lightly. "You always make the house feel alive." I smiled, pouring him water from the crystal carafe. "You need to eat more than talk tonight." He gave a half smile, that old mischievous one I used to fall for when we were 25 and broke. Then after a long silence, he said, "I've been thinking about restructuring assets." The fork paused mid-air. Restructuring. He nodded, cutting into his chicken, though he barely touched it. "The board wants clearer lines of control. Sarah mentioned it might be time to simplify holdings, reduce legal overlap. It's nothing urgent." I studied him for a moment. His voice sounded off, too rehearsed, like he was reading from someone else's script. "Sarah mentioned," I repeated softly. He looked up, then the candlelight catching in his gray eyes. "She's sharp, Kathleen. I know you've had your Reservations, but she's good at this. Knows how to navigate the new regulations. I wanted to believe him. For years, Richard had been a careful man, cautious to the point of obsession. He never signed a document without 3 layers of review, but ever since the diagnosis, he had become pliable, too trusting of anyone who promised to lighten his load. Sarah arrived 20 minutes late, hair still damp from the drizzle phone in hand. She didn't apologize, just said traffic was insane, and placed her phone face down next to her plate. The screen kept lighting up every few seconds. "Dad," she said. Leaning forward, I spoke to the legal team today. There are some forms you need to sign before Monday. Medical authorizations. Routine. Routine. Richard repeated like the word itself gave him comfort. She reached into her bag and pulled out a thin folder. Her nails clicked against the clasp as she opened it. The papers inside were neatly clipped, color-coded tabs on the side. She always did that made manipulation look like professionalism. I watched her slide the folder toward Richard. "You can just sign the last page," she said lightly. "It's a standard healthcare proxy, lets me make quick decisions if you're sedated. It's really just a precaution." My heart sank. "Shouldn't I?" She cut me off, smiling that lawyer's smile. "Of course, Kathleen. You're already listed as primary. This just ensures continuity." Richard adjusted his glasses and reached into his pocket. I still remember the sound, the faint metallic click of the silver pen cap. He'd used that same pen for every major signature of his career company, mergers, property deeds, even the foundation charter. He used to joke it was his good luck charm, though it wasn't luck that built our life. It was discipline. The candlelight flickered, casting a thin beam that caught the pen's chrome edge. The flame reflected in it, small, steady, like an eye that never blinked. I said quietly, "Let me read it, Rich." He hesitated, pen hovering above the page. "It's just paperwork, darling. I still want to know what it says." Sarah's tone softened, fake gentle like silk over steel. "It's exactly what it sounds like. Power of attorney, nothing more." That word attorney settled uneasily between us. I could feel it crawl across the table. Richard sighed, signing his name in slow, deliberate strokes. The pen moved smoothly, but his hand trembled at the end of the line. I reached out instinctively, steadying his wrist. His skin was cold. "There," he said. "All done." Sarah took the paper back before the ink was dry. "Perfect," she said, tucking it into her bag. "I'll file this first thing Monday." When she looked at me, her smile didn't reach her eyes. "You two enjoy dinner. I've got some calls to finish." The sound of her heels faded down the hallway. Richard leaned back, exhausted, closing his eyes. The candle flame danced on the surface of his water glass. "She's just trying to help," he murmured. I didn't answer. I was looking at the reflection of the silver pen still lying beside his plate. Its surface glimmered under the candlelight, the ink tip faintly smudged. "Do you trust her?" I asked. He opened his eyes slowly. "I trust you," he said. Then, almost as an afterthought, "She's family. Family." I'd heard that word weaponized enough times in my career to know what it meant when spoken like that obligation dressed as virtue. After dinner, I washed the dishes alone. The sound of running water mixed with the faint echo of his cough in the next room. I glanced toward the dining table. The folder was gone. Only the pen remained. I picked it up, turning it in my hand. It felt heavier than it should have. A small engraving near the clip caught my eye, RRM, 1974, the year we met. My thumb brushed over it like tracing the past. The candle had nearly burned out, its last flame trembling. I set the pen back down on the table directly in the circle of light. Richard called from the living room. "Leave it there," he said softly. "I'll need it tomorrow." I didn't know it then, but that was the last dinner we'd ever share. The next morning, he collapsed while feeding the dog. The ambulance lights painted the kitchen walls red. I remember clutching that same pen in my pocket as I rode beside him, my hand shaking, trying not to drop it. At the hospital, they took everything: his watch, his wallet, the pen. I never saw it again. Or at least I thought I didn't. Because at the will reading, when Sarah smiled like she'd already won, that same silver pen was lying on the lawyer's desk. And that was the moment I knew whatever game she thought she was playing. Richard had already left me the first clue. After the funeral, the house didn't sound the same. It used to breathe with him, the faint hum of his office fan, the slow shuffle of his slippers down the hall, the smell of his aftershave lingering in the doorway. Now there was only stillness. Even the floorboards seemed to hesitate before creaking. The guests had all gone, their condolences fading into polite distance. The flowers Sarah ordered sat perfectly arranged, already beginning to wilt at the edges. She had been efficient, as always, efficient enough to make grief look like a business meeting. That afternoon, she came to the house dressed in black, but wore heels that clicked like punctuation marks. Evan trailed behind her, hands in his pockets, eyes vacant. "Mom," she said, stepping into the foyer, "I'll handle the paperwork for the estate. There's just a few things to organize before we file everything." Her tone was professional, detached, the same one she used when talking to clients on speakerphone. She didn't look at me when she spoke. She was already scanning the hallway like an auditor inspecting property. I didn't answer. I just nodded. She disappeared into Richard's office, the door closing behind her with a quiet click. For the next hour, I heard drawers opening, paper sliding, the faint metallic sound of keys. When she emerged, she carried a small box wrapped in brown paper. "This was in his desk," she said. "He wanted you to have it." There was no card, no note, only the box. I took it, waiting for her to leave before unwrapping it. Inside lay Richard's wristwatch, the one he wore almost every day for 40 years. The leather strap was cracked, the face slightly scratched, still set to 7:42. No note, no words, just time stopped. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with the box beside me, the clock ticking in the hallway. The air smelled faintly of candle wax and damp wood. I realized how strange it was that Sarah had been the one to find the watch. Richard never let anyone touch his desk. The next morning, I went to his office. The door handle was cold under my hand. When I turned it, it didn't budge. Locked. I stared at it for a long minute, heart tightening. He'd never locked it before, not once in 40 years. I tried the old brass key that had always hung on the hook near the window. It slid in but refused to turn. Someone had changed the lock. When Sarah stopped by later that afternoon, I asked casually, "Did you change the locks in your father-in-law's office?" Her eyes flickered for half a second, too quick for anyone else to notice. "Oh, that, yes. The lawyer advised it for security reasons. We can't have documents going missing before probate." "Of course," I said quietly. "Security." That night, I couldn't sleep. The thought of that locked room pressed against me like a physical weight. By morning, I'd made up my mind. I called a locksmith. The man arrived at noon, polite and wordless, the kind of worker who doesn't ask questions if you pay in cash. Within minutes, the door clicked open. He packed his tools, wished me a good day, and left. The smell hit me first, faint dust mixed with something metallic. Richard's office had always been meticulously neat, but now it looked disturbed. Files that used to sit perfectly aligned were slightly off-center. The rug near the bookshelf was curled. A faint mark of something heavy being dragged across the floor ran to the desk. I stepped closer. His chair was turned slightly as if someone had left in a hurry. The desk drawers were mostly empty paper clips, pens, old receipts. But the bottom one resisted when I pulled. I knelt, tugged harder. It gave way with a small snap, revealing a thin manila folder tucked underneath the drawer's baseboard. There was no label, just faint fingerprints on the corner. I carried it to the window where the light from the gray afternoon spilled across the desk. The folder was old edges, softened, faintly smelling of tobacco. Inside were 5 pages of lined stationery, all in Richard's handwriting. The first line froze me draft. "Personal will not to be filed until reviewed." My chest tightened. The handwriting was shaky but clear. Each paragraph laid out details, the trust the company shares, the family foundation. It wasn't identical to the will Sarah had presented. This version still listed my name, Kathleen Mercer, as co-trustee. At the bottom, a note in smaller letters caught my eye. "Sarah insists I update everything." But why the rush? I read it twice, 3 times. The last word "rush" was underlined. My fingers trembled slightly as I turned the final page. It wasn't signed. The space for the signature was blank, but the line beneath bore a faint glimmer, a streak of silver ink smudged near the corner. I knew that ink. Richard's silver pen, the one Sarah said had gone missing. I lifted the page closer to the window. The smudge caught the light's small oval unmistakable. A fingerprint, maybe, or the trace of a hand that hesitated before signing. My breath grew shallow. If this draft was genuine, it meant Sarah had known she'd seen this version, ignored it, replaced it. The silence in the room felt heavier now. I could almost hear Richard's voice the way he used to say, "Always keep your records straight, Katie." I placed the papers back into the folder carefully, like handling evidence. Then I opened the top drawer again, looking for the silver pen. It wasn't there. Instead, I found the empty pen case, the one engraved with his initials. The inside was clean, almost too clean, as if someone had wiped it. My reflection stared back at me in the glass of the office window. Behind me, the house looked both familiar and foreign walls. I'd painted curtains, I'd sewn furniture we'd chosen together. And yet it felt like a stranger's house now. Because a home without trust isn't a home. It's a stage one where love had been performed until the curtain quietly fell. I placed the watch beside the folder. Time and truth both stopped mid-motion. The clock in the hallway chimed 5. Outside, the sun slipped behind a gray curtain of clouds, turning everything the color of old paper. For a long while, I stood there staring at the faint smudge of silver ink under the lamplight. That small mark, that accident of hesitation, spoke louder than any will could. It was proof that Richard had tried to tell me something before he left, and that the answers I was looking for weren't gone. They were hidden, right here, inside a house that no longer felt like home. The day after I found the draft, I didn't sleep. Every creak of the house sounded like a question I couldn't answer. By sunrise, I had made coffee. I didn't drink, ironed a shirt I didn't wear, and stood at the window watching my own reflection fade into daylight. There was only one person I could trust to make sense of what I'd found: Harlan Pierce, the same man who had laughed during the will reading. I called his office just after 8. His assistant, a polite young man with a voice that tried too hard to sound confident, said Mr. Pierce had a full morning but could see me at noon. I arrived 15 minutes early. The law firm was in an old brick building downtown, the kind of place where the carpet smells faintly of paper and dusted leather. Harlan's door was half open. He stood by the window, reading glasses low on his nose, the city skyline reflected in the glass behind him. When he saw me, he didn't smile, just gestured to the chair across from his desk. "I was expecting you," he said simply. "You knew I'd come." He nodded, folding his arms. "I saw the look on your face that day. I've seen it before, the moment someone realizes the story they've been told doesn't line up with the paperwork." I opened my bag and placed the yellow folder on his desk. I found this in Richard's office. It's a handwritten draft, not signed, but there's a note. He wrote that Sarah was rushing him. Harlan didn't touch it right away. He stared at the folder as though it might burn his fingers. Then he pulled out a pair of thin gloves from his drawer, the kind archivists use, and began turning the pages one by one. He read silently for a few minutes, lips pressed tight. Then he exhaled slowly. "This," he said, tapping the corner of the first page, "is the real will." My pulse quickened. Then what did she file? He took off his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. Something else entirely. I didn't draft the version Sarah presented. My signature was photocopied, not ink, and the witness names on her version. He looked up at me. "They don't belong to anyone on my staff." I stared at him, the words catching in my throat. "You mean yes?" He leaned back, voice calm but deliberate. The filed document was altered, replaced in our system 4 days before Richard's death. I swallowed hard. Replaced how Harlan reached for a file on his credenza, flipping through a stack of internal logs. Every document we file is scanned into a secure database. We keep digital backups time-stamped and encrypted. Someone logged into our system that weekend. Sunday night. No official upload was scheduled. Sunday, I repeated. He nodded, and the office was closed. He opened his drawer, retrieved a card, and slid it across the desk. There's someone you need to meet, Olivia Tran. She used to handle our digital archiving, quiet, detail-oriented. She left the firm 2 months ago for medical school, but I still have her contact. I took the card. Will she talk to me? Maybe. She's careful. But she was working the night that file was re-uploaded. If anyone noticed something off, it was her. That evening, I drove to a small cafe near the university, the kind of place with mismatched mugs and soft jazz playing too low to follow. Olivia arrived 5 minutes late, hair pulled back, glasses fogged from the drizzle outside. She recognized me immediately. "Mrs. Mercer," she said, extending a hand. "Mr. Pierce told me you might reach out." We sat in the back corner. Her hands fidgeted with the spoon stirring sugar she never added. "I remember that week clearly," she began. "We'd just upgraded our document system. Sarah came in after hours, said she needed to re-upload one of the estate files because the formatting looked wrong on her end. After hours, I asked." "Yes. It was a Friday night around 9. I almost didn't let her in, but she had Richard's authorization papers and said it was urgent." My heart thudded. Was Richard there? She shook her head. "No, just Sarah. She was alone." I helped her log in, then stepped away for about 15 minutes to finish another task. When I came back, she was gone. She'd left the scanner running. "Running?" Olivia nodded. "Yeah." The sound stayed with me. The click, whir click of the scanner cycling pages in the dark. It went on and on. When I checked the log later, there were multiple uploads, same file name but different timestamps. One of them was dated Sunday. That shouldn't have been possible. She leaned closer, her voice low. I reported it to the system admin. He said it must have been a time zone glitch. But it didn't feel right. I could almost hear it, that steady rhythm she described. The sound of a machine doing something it shouldn't while the world slept. "Do you still have access to the logs?" I asked. Olivia hesitated. "Not directly, but I backed up one of the server directories before I left just to keep samples of my work. It's nothing illegal public metadata. I can show you." She opened her laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard. The glow from the screen lit her face in shades of blue. There she said, turning it toward me. A list of timestamps scrolled down the screen, file IDs, upload dates, IP addresses. "Look at that one." She pointed to a row halfway down. March 12th, 11:48 p.m. Sarah's user ID, March 14, 2:03 p.m. system sync, March 16, 8:27 p.m. Sunday. The firm had been closed that Sunday. My hands went cold. What does this mean? Olivia closed the laptop softly. "It means someone deliberately replaced the file outside office hours. And if the log's right, they used an admin override to delete the previous version permanently." I sat back, the air thick with realization. The puzzle pieces, the new lock, the missing pen, the unsigned draft were aligning in a way that made my stomach twist. Harlan was right. This wasn't an error. It was orchestration. I thanked Olivia, promising discretion. Before leaving, she handed me a flash drive. "Everything's on here, metadata, copies of the logs, screenshots. If anything happens, Mr. Pierce knows where to find me." The drive felt heavy in my pocket as I drove home. Rain streaked across the windshield, the wipers beating a steady rhythm. Click, whir, click, echoing the scanner in Olivia's story. When I reached home, the house was dark. I didn't turn on the lights right away. Instead, I stood in the doorway listening to the silence. Somewhere deep inside that silence, I imagined the faint hum of a scanner working after hours, duplicating, overwriting, erasing. Richard's handwriting had been replaced once, but not anymore, because now I had proof that someone had rewritten the truth. For 3 nights, I barely slept. Every sound in the house felt amplified: the creak of pipes, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint ticking of Richard's watch on my bedside table. The folder from his office lay on the dresser beside the flash drive Olivia had given me. I kept staring at both, wondering what I was missing. Then around 2 a.m., it struck me. Richard's phone. Sarah had taken his laptop, his files, even his briefcase, but she hadn't touched his old iPad. It was still in the drawer of his nightstand, plugged in screen dark under a thin layer of dust. I pulled it out, the charger stiff in my hands. The device lit up instantly, his wallpaper appearing an old photo of the two of us on the Oregon coast. The tide low, the light gold. I hadn't seen that picture in years. The passcode came to me instinctively, 0714, our anniversary. It unlocked on the first try. Most of the apps were untouched. Calendar notes, weather, all last used months ago. But in the corner of the screen, a small red circle glowed above the mail icon. 3 unread messages. When I opened the inbox, my chest tightened. The newest message was from Sarah, sent 2 days before he was admitted to the hospital. Subject line, authorization request. It read, "Dad, please review and sign the updated documents before Monday. We can't afford delays on the restructuring. Don't worry, everything's exactly as we discussed. Love S." There were no attachments, no signature. Just her casual confidence bleeding through every word. But it wasn't the inbox that caught my attention. It was the drafts folder. 1 unsent message. Timestamp the night before he collapsed. I tapped it open. There was no recipient, just a single sentence typed neatly across the white screen. "If something happens to me, tell Harlan the trust remains intact under Clause 14B. That was all. No greeting, no closing, just the quiet precision of a man who knew he might not have time to explain. Clause 14B. The phrase rang in my head like an alarm. I had read both the signed and unsigned versions of his will, every line, every footnote. There was no Clause 14B in the document Sarah had presented. I scrolled through the email headers. It had been saved automatically to drafts but never sent. The system log showed it had synced once to iCloud, then gone offline. He must have typed it late that night, too weak or too wary to finish. My hands trembled slightly as I took a screenshot, then printed it from my home office printer. The ink came out uneven, but the words were legible enough to make my pulse quicken. "If something happens to me, tell Harlan the trust remains intact under Clause 14B. That morning, I called Harlan. My voice was steadier than I felt. "We need to meet. It's urgent." His office was dim when I arrived, only a desk lamp lit coffee steaming beside a pile of folders. He looked up when I entered, his eyes narrowing when he saw the paper in my hand. I placed the printout on his desk without a word. He read it once, twice. Then he took off his glasses, set them down, and whispered, "Clause 14B. He leaned back, visibly shaken. "Good God, what does it mean?" I asked. He turned to the bookshelf behind him, pulling out a thick binder labeled Trust Framework, 2006. "Richard drafted a supplemental clause years ago," he explained. "It wasn't part of the main will, it was part of the family trust. 14B outlined emergency succession in case of misconduct by a fiduciary." "Misconduct," I repeated. "Yes." He flipped to a tabbed section and pointed to a paragraph highlighted in yellow. "In the event of undue influence, fraud, or legal coercion affecting trust management authority shall revert to secondary trustee, namely spouse Kathleen Mercer, until independent review is completed." He looked at me, the weight of realization softening his voice. "Kathleen, this clause gave you control, not Sarah." I felt a tremor run through me. "But the clause isn't in the version she filed." "Because it was deleted," he said. "Clause 14B was only referenced in the trust deed, not the will. If she replaced the original trust documents, she erased your authority entirely." He sat down again, fingers steepled. "This email, this single line, proves Richard remembered that clause. He was trying to protect you, to warn me, maybe both." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Outside the window, rain began tapping softly against the glass. The sound filled the silence between us like a clock restarting. Finally, Harlan said, "We need to trace this back to the trust filing. If Clause 14B was ever referenced in the firm's original digital record, we can recover it. Olivia's metadata will help." He reached for the flash drive I had given him earlier. "If there's even a single mention of that clause number in the server logs, it means the real trust still exists." I exhaled slowly. "You think she didn't destroy it completely?" He smiled faintly, the kind of smile people give when they've seen too much corruption to believe in accidents. People like Sarah rarely delete. They overwrite. They want control, not absence. An overwritten data well that leaves traces. He turned his monitor toward me, typing quickly. The screen glowed with lines of code and timestamps. The faint whir of the external drive joined the rain's rhythm. Then somewhere deep in the speakers came the familiar hum, the echo of a scanner caught in the background of an old upload log Olivia had saved. Whir, click, whir. It sounded almost alive, steady, mechanical, relentless. "There it is," Harlan said quietly, pointing to a string of text at the bottom of the recovered file list. Trust Deed 14B Backup, TIFAIF created, March 10, 9, 17 p.m. created, I whispered. Not deleted. He nodded, meaning it existed. Maybe still does. I leaned forward. Where would it be now? If Sarah wanted to hide it, she wouldn't risk deleting it outright. Too traceable. She'd move it, rename it, bury it under a different category, maybe even offload it to an external account. I stared at the monitor, my throat dry. Then how do we find it? He looked up from the screen, his expression sharper now. By following her digital fingerprints, every edit, every upload, every Sunday night log entry, she left breadcrumbs without realizing it. He picked up the printed email again, smoothing it flat with one hand. This, he said softly, isn't just a message. It's a key. Clause 14B is the lock. And if we can open it... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The rain outside grew heavier, drumming against the glass like the heartbeat of something waking up. For the first time since Richard's death, I felt the faint edge of purpose cutting through the fog. He had tried to speak. The world had just been too loud to hear him. But now I was listening. And if Clause 14B still existed in that buried archive, then Richard's true will hadn't died with him. Harlan said he could get us in after hours. Technically, it wasn't illegal. The records belonged to the firm, and I was listed as an authorized family representative under Richard's estate. But the way he said it after hours carried a weight that made my stomach tighten. When the clock hit 9, Olivia met me in the alley behind the old law office. She wore a gray hoodie over her scrubs, her face pale in the yellow glow of the parking lot light. In her hand was a single access card. The night guard's on break until midnight, she whispered. We'll have 40 minutes. I followed her through the service entrance. The air inside was dry stale, the smell of old paper and toner. Somewhere above us, the hum of a fluorescent bulb buzzed unevenly, cutting in and out like a dying insect. Every sound seemed magnified, the echo of our shoes on the tile, the click of the badge reader, the faint shuffle of folders in the next room. The records archive was 3 floors below ground, a long corridor lined with steel shelving. Olivia led the way, the flashlight from her phone guiding us through the narrow aisles. Everything from before 2018 was moved to cold storage, she murmured. But digital audits are still mirrored here, physical printouts of the access logs. We should find the one tied to March. I nodded, though my heart was pounding so hard it made my pulse echo in my ears. We stopped in front of a locked cabinet labeled Estate Records, Mercer Trust. Olivia swiped her card, the lock releasing with a sharp click. Inside were hundreds of folders, slim, precise, alphabetized. She pulled one halfway out and frowned. This shouldn't be here, she said. It's a duplicate file, same ID number as the active one, but with no destruction tag. She handed it to me. My name was typed cleanly on the cover. Mercer Kathleen, secondary trustee. I opened it carefully. Inside were printed logs, lines of timestamps, usernames, access codes. Each line represented a moment someone had touched the digital record of Richard's trust. My eyes ran down the page. March 10th, 8:04 p.m., Harlan Pierce. March 12th, 6:51 p.m., Richard Mercer. March 13th, 9:58 p.m., Sarah Whitmore. March 14th, 11:42 p.m., Sarah Whitmore, admin. Override 2 days before Richard's death. My throat went dry. She uploaded the fake version that night, I whispered. Olivia's expression hardened. It fits. That's when she came back to correct the format. I thought it was strange she used her father-in-law's credentials. She said he was sleeping and had given permission. I closed my eyes for a moment. The room felt colder suddenly, as though the air itself remembered. We moved deeper into the archive. The sound of paper brushing paper filled the space like a whispering tide. A single fluorescent light flickered above us, throwing shadows across the metal racks. Olivia reached for another binder labeled System Audit Cloud Transfer Records. The pages were thick with printed metadata, thousands of lines of numbers file hashes, IP logs. And there, halfway down the page, was a line that made the room tilt. User Switmore admin. Upload trust. Final PFAF. Timestamp 11:42:06 p.m. IP internal server 07 next line same minute, same IP different user. User M. Greer. Access auth file attachment. Timestamp 11:42:49 p.m. I froze. Who's M. Greer? Olivia frowned. That's not a staff ID. The system prefixes firm employees with initials and department tags. M means external medical authorization. Medical. She nodded slowly. Someone logged in through the healthcare proxy interface. That means Sarah used her medical power of attorney to verify the upload. The realization sank in like cold metal. Richard had signed that proxy during the last dinner. The document Sarah swore was just precautionary. She had used it to override his access and upload the forged trust. Olivia whispered, "Justice doesn't scream. It timestamps." Her words hung in the air, quiet absolute. We turned another page. The timestamp had a location tag, Server Room 2, East Wing. That was 2 floors above us. I didn't think. I just moved. The stairwell door creaked open, the sound echoing down the concrete shaft. Olivia followed, holding the flashlight low. The east wing smelled faintly of ozone and disinfectant, a scent that never fades from buildings full of machines. The server room's glass door stood half open. Inside, the red lights of idle machines blinked in sequence, pulsing softly like a heartbeat. The hum was steady, almost alive. We walked between the racks. The whir of the cooling fans filled the silence, vibrating through the floor. In the far corner, a small workstation sat beneath a wall-mounted security camera. A monitor glowed faintly left on sleep mode. Olivia pressed a key. The screen came to life, the log viewer still open. The final line matched what we'd seen below. Upload complete. User Switmore admin. Verified by M. Greer. I whispered he was a doctor. Milo Greer. He signed Richard's hospital admission form. Olivia turned toward me, her eyes wide. Then she didn't just fake a signature. She had help. For a moment, the only sound was the hum of the machines. Then in the reflection of the glass cabinet, I saw the security camera pivot slightly, slow, deliberate, like an eye waking up. Olivia's hand went still on the mouse. "It's motion triggered," she said. "Can it record?" She nodded. Always. The realization hit both of us at once. If the camera had been running the night Sarah accessed the server, there was a visual log, a recording. Proof. But before we could move, the lights above flickered again. Once, twice, then stabilized. Olivia whispered, "We shouldn't be here long. If the system's live, someone could be monitoring." I reached for the printed audit log, folding it into my coat. My pulse hammered in my ears. "Let's go," I said quietly. We slipped out the same way we came, closing the door behind us. The hum of the servers faded into distance, replaced by the soft rhythm of our footsteps. At the exit, I turned back once more. Through the small glass window, the red lights of the machine still pulsed, slow, methodical, patient. They didn't lie. They didn't feel guilt. They just remembered. When I reached my car, the night felt sharper, the kind of cold that carries meaning. I sat behind the wheel, the log heavy in my lap, the words burning in my head. 11:42 p.m., Sarah Whitmore. Admin override. 2 days before Richard died. And below it, another name I hadn't expected. Dr. Milo Greer. Hospitals have a particular kind of silence. Not peaceful, not quiet, but watchful. That was the first thing I noticed when I walked into St. Andrew's Medical Center, the same hospital where Richard had taken his last breath. The same hallway I had walked down months ago, numb and trembling, clutching a paper cup of coffee that had gone cold long before the doctor said the words, "time of death." This time, I wasn't here as a widow. I was here for answers. The receptionist looked up as I approached. "Dr. Greer's office," I asked. She nodded toward the east wing. End of the hall, past radiology. My heels made soft sounds against the tile. Each step echoed against white walls lined with posters about patient rights and trust words that felt cruelly ironic. When I reached the office, the door was slightly ajar. A brass plate read M. Greer, M.D., Palliative Care. I knocked gently. "Come in," a voice said. Dr. Milo Greer looked up from behind his desk, eyes tired but kind. He was in his 50s with graying hair at his temples and hands that fidgeted with a pen as though holding it gave him something to hide behind. "Mrs. Mercer," he said softly, "I was wondering when you'd come. That stopped me. You knew I would." He sighed, gesturing to the chair opposite him. When a man like Richard Mercer passes and the paperwork starts changing faster than the grief can settle, someone always comes back. I sat down. "You signed his death certificate." "I did. And you verified his power of attorney signature the night before he collapsed." He looked at me then, not defensive but burdened. "Yes." "Dr. Greer," I said quietly, "that document wasn't medical authorization. It was financial. And it was signed with my husband's name under sedation." The pen in his hand stopped moving. He stared at it, then placed it down carefully beside a stack of folders. "I shouldn't even be talking to you without counsel," he murmured, "but I can't carry this anymore." He stood, walked to the blinds, and pulled them halfway shut. Richard was one of the good ones. I treated him for over a year. He trusted people sometimes too easily. That last week he was on light sedatives, pain management only, but Sarah came in with papers, said they were health care directives. My pulse thudded in my ears. "And you let her." She said he'd asked for her help. She had the legal proxy. Everything looked official. I didn't suspect a thing. He sank back into his chair. I remember she placed the folder on his lap and told him to sign the last page. He was awake, aware, but frail. His hand shook. He asked what it was. She said, "Just confirming I can approve the next round of treatment if you're too tired to talk." I clenched my jaw. He trusted her. Dr. Greer nodded slowly. He did. I stepped out to give them privacy. When I came back, she was putting the folder away. He'd already signed. She smiled at me and asked if I could witness the signature for formality. I didn't read it. I just saw his name. He paused, his gaze heavy. When I later reviewed the patient file, the document wasn't there. Replaced by a financial authorization addendum with my witness signature on the bottom. That's when I realized something had gone very wrong. I sat in silence, the weight of his words pressing down on every breath. "She forged the transfer under his power of attorney," I whispered. "And you," he interrupted gently, "was the unknowing witness?" "Yes." He reached into a drawer and pulled out a sealed envelope. "I've been keeping this. It's a copy of my note from that night. The hospital requires attending physicians to log every sedative administered. I wrote down exactly what he took and the time." He slid the paper across the desk. "He wasn't on heavy drugs, Mrs. Mercer. His cognitive state was intact, but he was exhausted. The medication he received makes patients compliant, calm, agreeable. Not unconscious, just softened." I unfolded the note. 9:12 p.m., administered lorazepam low dosage, patient awake, present Sarah Whitmore proxy, signed Dr. M. Greer. My eyes stung. He signed under sedation. "Yes," the doctor said quietly. I failed to protect him. I told myself it was harmless, that families have strange ways of handling things near the end. But when the estate filings changed after he died, I knew. He looked up, his expression pained. And that pen, she brought it with her. Silver engraved with his initials. I remember because he dropped it once and she scolded him for smudging it. He laughed, said, "It's just a pen, Sarah." I froze. The silver pen. The same one from our last dinner. the same one that had reappeared on the lawyer's desk at the will reading, Dr. Greer went on. When he signed, she took the pen immediately, wiped it with a tissue before putting it back in its case. At the time, I thought she was just particular. But now... He trailed off. The silence between us was thick. I whispered, "She wasn't wiping ink. She was wiping prints." He nodded slowly. "If you still have that pen, it could tell you everything. Fingerprints, residue, pressure patterns, the mark of who held it last." I thought back to Richard's office, the empty case, the missing pen. Sarah must have taken it after the funeral, or perhaps even before. "Dr. Greer," I said, meeting his eyes, "do you realize what you're admitting?" He exhaled. "Yes, and I'll testify to it. I can't undo what happened, but I can confirm the truth. That Richard signed a document under sedation misled by his daughter-in-law, believing it was medical authorization." He leaned forward. "He never would have signed away control of his life or his legacy in full awareness. He loved you. He told me that, even in pain." For a moment, my composure cracked. I pressed a hand against my mouth, fighting the tremor in my chest. He placed the envelope back in my hand. "Keep this. It's dated, signed, and sealed. The hospital retains the original copy, but this will be enough for a preliminary inquiry." As I stood to leave, he said one last thing. If she used that pen, she tied herself to every signature. That's how truth hides not in words, but in ink. Outside the hallway, lights flickered, the same harsh white that made every shadow look too sharp. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and regret. I walked past the nurse's station, gripping the envelope tightly. The truth was spreading like a quiet current beneath the surface, time-stamped, recorded, undeniable. Sarah had built her scheme around forged paper, manipulated access, and one crucial symbol of trust, the silver pen. She had erased his voice, rewritten his signature, and thought she could bury both under bureaucracy. But what she didn't know was that every tool she used, every digital trace, every drop of ink could just as easily turn against her. As I stepped into the cold evening air, I whispered to the empty street, "You were right, Richard. Paper never lies." I looked at the sealed envelope again, the date, the dosage, the witness all preserved. And at the center of it all was that pen, the same object that had followed me from dinner to hospital to lawyer's desk. It wasn't just sentimental, it was physical truth. And now I finally understood. By the time the courthouse opened that Monday morning, I'd already been awake for hours. The night before, I'd placed every piece of evidence on the dining table, the envelope from Dr. Greer, the audit logs Olivia had saved the email Richard never sent, and a photograph of the silver pen. Each item sat in quiet order, like soldiers lined up before battle. Harlan arrived at 7:30 sharp. He didn't waste time on sympathy. "We'll file for a temporary restraining order on the trust," he said, his voice crisp. "If granted, it freezes all Mercer Holdings assets until the court reviews the fraud evidence." He slid a thick packet of papers toward me. The top page bore the heading, "Petition for Injunctive Relief." I stared at the blank signature line at the bottom. "Do you think they'll believe me?" Harlan's gaze was steady. "They won't need to believe you, Kathleen. They'll believe the timestamps." We spent the next 3 hours in the courthouse annex, the air thick with the smell of toner and wet wool. The petition outlined every finding, the metadata logs showing an upload at 11:42 p.m. by Sarah Whitmore 2 days before Richard Mercer's death. A scanned signature verified under sedation by Dr. Milo Greer. The recovered draft while containing the phrase, "Sarah insists I update everything." But why the rush? And the forensic report Harlan had rushed through over the weekend, partial fingerprints lifted from the silver pen. The lab results were conclusive. The dominant prints belonged to Richard Mercer. A second partial set matched Sarah, but only on the exterior casing, not the grip, meaning he held it to sign. She handled it after. Perfect chain of proof, Harlan said, stacking the exhibits neatly. Forgery dressed as caregiving. The court won't ignore this. When it was my turn to sign the affidavit, I hesitated. The pen on the desk, a standard blue Bic, felt wrong in my hand. Cold, disposable, impersonal. I reached into my bag and took out the silver pen. Its weight grounded me. The same pen that had started all of this. The same pen Richard had trusted. The clerk looked up, startled. "Ma'am, that's quite a pen." "Yes," I said quietly, "it is." I uncapped it, and for the first time in months the ink touched paper under my own control. My signature curved across the page in clean, deliberate strokes. The moment it dried, I felt something shift, small but seismic. A reclamation. By Thursday, the court date was set. Sarah's response arrived the next morning in an envelope stamped, "Urgent. Private counsel." Her lawyer's letter was venom masked in legal polish. "Our client is deeply concerned for Mrs. Mercer's emotional and mental state. In light of recent behavior and apparent cognitive decline, we urge the court to consider medical evaluation before accepting filings on her behalf." I read the lines twice, my hands steady despite the rage beneath them. "She's accusing me of senility," I said flatly. Harlan didn't even look up from his desk. "That's her play. Discredit the witness. Typical." A second page followed, even more absurd. Further, Ms. Whitmore maintains that all documents filed under the Mercer Holdings Trust are authentic and verified. Allegations of forgery are not only defamatory, but will be pursued accordingly. Harlan smirked, the faintest spark of satisfaction in his eyes. Good. Now she's officially on record denying everything. That means the forensic evidence will hit twice as hard. He turned the letter over, scribbled a note in the margin. "Will respond formally, but this tells me she's nervous." The hearing was brief but electric. The courtroom was cool, lit by morning sun slanting through high windows. Sarah sat at the opposite table, perfectly composed, dressed in gray, her expression polished into sympathy for the judge's benefit. Her lawyer, a man with an expensive haircut and a voice like melted butter, spoke first. "Your Honor, Mrs. Mercer's claims are speculative at best. There's no concrete proof of tampering. The petitioner is grieving, understandably distraught, and regrettably misled by digital anomalies." I glanced toward Harlan. He waited for the man to finish, then stood adjusting his glasses. "With respect, Your Honor," he said evenly, "the anomalies my colleague mentions have names, dates, and fingerprints." He placed a folder on the table, sliding copies to the clerk and opposing counsel. "Exhibit A, the metadata record showing an administrative override by the respondent, Sarah Whitmore, at 11:42 p.m., 2 days before Mr. Mercer's death. Exhibit B, the forensic report identifying Mr. Mercer's own prints on the signing instrument, but the respondent's on the cap and barrel. Exhibit C, witness statements from Olivia Tran, former records clerk, and Dr. Milo Greer, attending physician." Sarah's lawyer tried to interrupt, but the judge raised a hand. "Let him continue." Harlan leaned slightly forward. "Your Honor, we are not here to assign guilt. We are here to protect the estate from further manipulation while evidence is reviewed. Therefore, we ask for a temporary freeze on all accounts and asset transfers under Mercer Holdings until full audit verification is completed." He paused. "Justice doesn't scream, Your Honor. It timestamps." The room fell silent. The judge, a woman with a face carved by patience and exhaustion, reviewed the papers for a long minute. Then she looked up. "The court finds sufficient cause to issue a temporary restraining order. All Mercer Holdings accounts and related trust assets are hereby frozen pending further review." The gavel struck once, sharp, final. I exhaled for the first time in what felt like weeks. Sarah turned toward me across the aisle, her composure cracking for just a moment. Her lips pressed into a thin, furious line. For that heartbeat, I didn't feel anger, only the stillness of equilibrium. The truth had begun to catch up. Outside the courthouse, the air smelled faintly of rain and paper. Reporters hadn't caught wind of the case yet, and for that, I was grateful. Harlan handed me a copy of the order. "This buys us time," he said. "She can't move money, can't liquidate holdings, can't touch a cent without court approval." I nodded. The pages rustled softly in the wind. Back home, I placed the documents on Richard's old desk next to his framed photo from our 25th anniversary. The silver pen rested beside it, polished now, its engraving catching the late afternoon light. For a moment I saw our reflection in the glass, two signatures decades apart bound by the same ink. Motif mirrored. The tool she used to erase me had become the instrument that restored me. I picked up the pen once more, turning it between my fingers. Its weight no longer felt like memory, it felt like proof. And as I looked down at the fresh court seal on the freeze order, a thin smile tugged at my lips. Because just when I thought the storm had calmed, another envelope arrived that evening. Heavy cardstock, gold trim, in honor of Richard Mercer, a memorial gala, hosted by Sarah Whitmore. The ink gleamed under the lamplight. The invitation said, "A celebration of legacy." Gold lettering embossed crest silk ribbon, every inch designed to project grace. But I knew better. It wasn't a tribute. It was theater. Sarah's theater. The Mercer Foundation headquarters sat in a glass tower downtown, the kind of place where the air itself seemed rehearsed. Inside, the lobby glowed with chandelier light and curated warmth. Staff greeted guests with champagne and hollow smiles. Everywhere I looked, Richard's name was on banners, printed programs etched into ice sculptures, but never once his face. I hadn't been invited to sit on stage, of course. My name wasn't on the official list of honored guests, but it was on the deed, and that was enough. Harlan had warned me she'll make her move there. The board will expect an announcement. You don't need to confront her, just let the paper speak. So I wore black. Not mourning black, but armor black, silk tailored quiet. I pinned Richard's cufflink to my collar, the one with the small engraving, KM Plus, RM 1987. And in my hand I carried a simple ivory envelope. Inside it, the original handwritten draft of Richard's will, complete with his signature and silver ink smudge. The metadata audit log showing Sarah's midnight override. Dr. Greer's sealed affidavit confirming the sedation and forged authorization. Proof that didn't shout. It simply existed. The ballroom filled quickly. Board members, donors, journalists, all gathered around round tables draped in white linen. A string quartet played something elegant and empty. At the far end of the stage, a massive portrait of Richard stood beside a podium crowned with the Mercer Holdings logo. Sarah stood behind it, flawless as ever. Her navy dress shimmered under the lights. Her posture was perfect, rehearsed. When she spotted me across the room, her smile flickered just for a second, then returned, wider, tighter. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice smooth as glass, "tonight we celebrate not just a man, but a vision. Richard Mercer built a legacy of integrity, innovation, and family stewardship. It's my honor to continue that vision with the full support of the Mercer family." There was polite applause. Cameras flashed. I didn't move. She continued, her tone dipped in false humility. "With Kathleen's blessing, I'll carry his legacy forward as acting chair of the Mercer Trust. Together, we'll ensure Richard's work lives on in every scholarship, every investment, every decision." My hands stayed steady. I could almost hear Harlan's words in my head. "Don't interrupt, just time it right." At my table, two board members whispered to each other, one of them. Mr. Lang, Richard's oldest partner, leaned closer. "She's smoother than a politician," he muttered. I turned to him, voice calm. "She's about to run out of lines." Then I reached into my handbag, removed the envelope, and slid it across the linen toward him. "Could you do me a favor, Mr. Lang? Deliver this to the chair before the announcement?" He looked at me, puzzled, cautious, then at the stage. But something in my eyes must have told him it wasn't a request. He stood, walked toward the front, and placed the envelope gently on the podium beside Sarah. She paused mid-sentence. "Thank you, Henry," she said with a strained smile, still performing. "How thoughtful." Then she saw the handwriting on the front. Her name, Sarah Whitmore Mercer, written in my penmanship. Her face changed, slightly but unmistakably. The quartet faltered. The room seemed to hold its breath. Sarah hesitated, eyes darting toward the audience, then back to the envelope. Slowly, she tore it open. The first thing she saw was the top page, the header of a digital audit log. User Switmore admin. Action file replacement. Time 11:42:06 p.m. The second, a scanned note from Dr. Milo Greer, MD, dated and signed confirming Richard's condition. The third, Richard's handwritten draft of his will with the faint silver ink smudge at the corner, the unmistakable mark of his favorite pen. For a moment, she didn't seem to understand. She blinked, reading line after line, her lips parting, but no words coming out. Then the whispers started. A man near the back leaned toward his companion. "That's a real audit log." Another voice. Wait, did she forge something? The quartet stopped playing entirely. Sarah looked up. Sarah's grip creases the audit log. A diamond stud tilts. She wets her lip and misses. This is private family correspondence," she stammered, irrelevant to tonight's event. But no one was listening to her anymore. Mr. Lang picked up the papers from the podium, scanning them quickly, his brows furrowed. "This shows Richard's signature 2 days before the hospital admission," he said aloud. "Why wasn't this version filed?" The air tightened. Reporters began lifting their phones. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. The truth was doing all the talking. Sarah's lawyer, sitting near the aisle, half rose from his chair, whispering frantically, "End it now. Walk away." But Sarah just stood there, frozen, cornered, shrinking beneath the weight of the paper in her own hands. Across the room, the lights dimmed slightly as the stage manager tried to resume the presentation. But it was too late. The illusion had cracked. The very foundation of her performance, Richard's legacy, her authority, her polished control, had collapsed in the silence. I caught her gaze once more. Her pupils were wide, her breathing shallow. For the first time since all of this began, she looked human. Not cunning, not composed, just afraid. Harlan's voice echoed softly in my mind. Justice doesn't scream. It timestamps. And there it was, the living proof of every timestamp, every fingerprint, every line of ink that refused to vanish. The board members moved into a huddle. Cameras flashed again this time, sharper, purposeful. A journalist whispered something to her cameraman. The red recording light blinked alive. Sarah's lawyer stepped forward to grab the documents, but Mr. Lang blocked him. "These stay with the board," he said firmly. "Effective immediately." The murmurs swelled. The music was gone, now replaced by a low collective disbelief that seemed to hum through the walls. I remained seated, hands folded in my lap, calm as the eye of a storm. No music, only paper breathing. Cameras click like insects while the board forms a huddle around the timestamps, the kind that speaks for itself when truth finally catches the light. And in that silence, I felt Richard's presence, not as memory, but as vindication. When the meeting dissolved into chaos, I rose, collected my coat, and walked toward the exit. Behind me, someone called my name. I didn't turn. At the reading, the lawyer laughed. That line had haunted me for months. Now sitting in the morning light of my old kitchen, it finally made sense. The house was quiet again, the kind of quiet that once felt heavy, but now carried peace. The ticking clock above the stove, the hum of the kettle, the faint creak of the wooden floorboards, all of it sounded alive in a way it hadn't since Richard's death. Outside, the lavender had bloomed early that year. The same lavender Richard planted every spring, insisting the scent made the house smell like patience. I smiled at the memory, his hands in the soil, his old hat tilted to one side, the silver pen always clipped in his shirt pocket like a charm against disorder. 2 months had passed since the night of the gala, 2 months since Sarah's downfall. The official statement came from the Mercer Foundation the following week, in the interest of preserving the family's integrity. Mrs. Sarah Whitmore Mercer has voluntarily stepped down from all fiduciary duties, effective immediately. No trial, no public scandal, just quiet retreat cloaked in language that pretended it was dignity. But I knew the truth she hadn't left for the family's sake. She left because the paper trail had no sympathy. Her attorney had called once, suggesting an amicable settlement. I refused. All I asked for was one thing: that the original handwritten version of Richard's will, the real one smudged and imperfect, be entered into public record. It was what he'd wanted. In one of his last letters to the board, he wrote, "Transparency is the best inheritance a man can leave behind." Now that letter hung framed in the Foundation's new lobby, and the silver pen that once betrayed him sat in a sealed case beside it, labeled the Garden Clause. That was what they'd begun calling it, the clause Richard had written by hand years ago when he drafted his first trust. It wasn't about money, not really. It was about stewardship. It read simply, "Let the property and its proceeds nourish growth in people, not power. In honesty, not ambition." I didn't know until later that Harlan had pushed for that phrase to be highlighted when the board reinstated the trust. It became part of the new mission statement. The irony wasn't lost on me. Sarah had tried to erase me from Richard's legacy, and in doing so, had immortalized the part of him she never understood. That morning, I poured tea into the old porcelain cup with the chipped handle. Steam curled upward, catching the light. The silver pen rested beside my saucer. I hadn't touched it since the court hearing. Harlan insisted it remain preserved, but he allowed me to keep it until the final documentation closed. I picked it up gently, the metal cool against my skin. It was heavier than I remembered. Or maybe I was just holding it differently now. When Richard used it, it was a symbol of habit, the tool of a man who believed order could protect him. When Sarah used it, it became a weapon proof of deceit disguised as routine. And now in my hands, it was something else entirely, evidence transformed into peace. I turned it slowly, watching sunlight glint along its engraved initials, RM. Some truths I thought take the long way home. Later that afternoon, Harlan stopped by. He carried a thin folder, the final administrative release. "It's over," he said simply, setting it on the table. "The accounts are restored. The trust is reinstated. You're listed as sole trustee until the board reappoints." I nodded. "Sarah won't contest, she's done," he said. "Her lawyer filed withdrawal papers this morning. She's leaving the state." There was no triumph in his voice, only the steady relief of work completed. "Will you reopen the foundation?" he asked after a moment. "Yes," I said, "but differently. Smaller. Closer to home. Scholarships for young accountants, maybe." Richard always believed in second chances. Harlan smiled faintly. He'd like that. He gathered his things, then paused at the door. "You know," he said when I laughed that day at the reading, "it wasn't mockery. It was relief." I realized Richard had outsmarted everyone, even in death. He'd left just enough of himself in the paperwork that no one could erase him. I felt warmth spread through me. "Now I understand," I said quietly. "Truth like ink always leaves a mark." He nodded once, then left me to the light and the lavender. I took my tea outside to the garden. The sun hung low, painting the world in gold and violet. The air smelled faintly of mint and wet soil. I knelt by the lavender bed, tracing the edge of the planter where Richard had once carved his initials. The letters had faded over the years, softened by time and weather, but they were still there, faint yet undeniable, much like the truth itself. I pressed the silver pen into the earth beside the plants, deep enough that it caught the light, but stayed grounded. Not buried, just resting. Some objects don't need to be displayed to matter. Some truths don't need to shout to be remembered. The breeze carried the faint chime of wind bells from the porch, the same ones Richard had hung years ago. Their tone was soft, pure, like laughter heard through memory. I closed my eyes, breathing in the scent of lavender. For the first time in a long while, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt earned. Now I understand why he laughed, because truth like ink always leaves a mark. If you've ever had to fight quietly for what was rightfully yours, tell me where you're listening from. Justice may be silent, but it's never absent. And that was how justice returned to silence. Not in courtrooms or headlines, but in the garden Richard built with love. Sometimes the truth doesn't roar. It whispers through lavender and paper, through the weight of a pen that never lied. If this story touched you, Take a moment to breathe and think about the quiet battles you've fought in your own life. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what justice means to you. I read every message. And if you believe that truth always finds its way home, no matter how long it takes, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story with someone who needs it. The pinned comment below holds a message just for you and the full list of hashtags to explore more stories like this one.